The National Cemetery Administration in 2016 created the Veterans Legacy Program. The mission of the NCA is to memorialize veterans in 135 cemeteries nationally. And they decided that they wanted to extend this memorialization by partnering with universities around the country. And UCF was selected as one of the inaugural schools to participate in this program. And UCF chose to do this by working last year with the Florida National Cemetery, creating biographies of over 100 veterans and accompanying K-12 materials that are available to the public both on our website and through our app. I think that the Day of Learning is really important to both the students who participate from Rogue Scholar this year, the K-12 students for whom we create this program, and I also think it's important to our UCF students for a number of reasons. So for the K-12 students who participate, they learn about U.S. history in a setting that is quite different than what they're used to. They're in a national cemetery where the lives of the veterans and their legacies come to life before them. They interact with UCF faculty and with students, and they see the enthusiasm that our UCF faculty and our students bring to the program, and I think that becomes infectious. And they learn an awful lot about U.S. history, but about the excitement that is doing historical research. We begin our Day of Learning with a ceremony. It sets the tone and it gives all the students a sense of the larger mission of the National Cemetery Administration. And our ceremony has a number of components. We have a number of people speak, including a dignitary from the National Cemetery Administration. We bring in a local ROTC group from a high school who present the colors. We have Pledge of Allegiance, and we also have someone who comes and plays taps, followed by a moment of silence. This ceremony, I think, helps to remind us that we are here not only to learn, but to honor American veterans. And I think most American veterans would appreciate that those who served are serving yet again to help us to understand American history through their service. One of the things that I think is really terrific about the way we've organized our Day of Learning is that faculty and students work together to develop the curriculum. We have, in most cases, a faculty and a student paired together to do the presentation, which helps it be even more interactive and allows the students from UCF to be teaching the K-12 students who are part of the Day of Learning. And so they see, that is the high school students or the middle school students, see what it's like to be a college student and to be involved in these programs.
Well, we were the first stop on the tour, and so it was our job to introduce the teachers and the students to the cemetery. And I really wanted to emphasize to them that it had a long history going back to the Spanish colonial times when it was used as a Franciscan monastery. And it had not been used as a cemetery until the U.S. took over. And at that point, I wanted them to sort of look out across the cemetery and tell me what they saw, and to think about what the stones can tell you, what you can read just looking at the size and the style of the stones. And you can see in the picture here across the pyramids, the tall obelisk, and that's what I was asking them to sort of see. And I said, what does that tell you about who's buried here? So it got them thinking about maybe these were important people, prominent people, wealthy people. So then we moved from that to saying, well, let's look at some of the headstones in the cemetery more closely. And that's where Brandon sort of took over.
So like Dr. French was saying, we really wanted to get hands-on with the students and kind of have them, of course, have the visual side, but also we wanted them to sort of engage in reading. So basically what we had them do was we would give them an example of the headstone here, and we would cover the text and have them attempt to read it. Kids really enjoyed it.
So what we would do at some point after they had made an attempt to read the stone, we would show them the words here. And it talked about being mourned by their friends and family. And the teachers and the students reacted to that because it was very emotional. It was very personal. It brought the person to life. This was a person who lived and died, and the people who created the stone wanted them to be remembered. And the students and the teachers all reacted to that. They felt connected to this person. In fact, at the bottom of the stone it says, "By strangers honored and by strangers mourned." And one of the points I made was, we're those strangers. We are here many, many years later remembering someone they wanted us to remember.
Our presentation focused on the Dade Pyramids and the Second Seminole War. At the St. Augustine National Cemetery, the Dade Pyramids, interred beneath the Dade Pyramids are as many as 1,468 soldiers who died during the Second Seminole War. This represents the largest group of soldiers who were interred there, yet the Second Seminole War and the Dade Pyramids themselves represent really a forgotten part of American history. So the goal of our presentation was to bring those pyramids, bring those soldiers back into the memory of the students who attended the presentation.
So we first engaged the students by having them line up with different materials and then to talk about and organize the wars chronologically, starting with the American Revolution through the 19th century wars, and determining the chronological order for them, and then organizing them by the total loss of life that occurred during those wars. For me personally as a graduate student, this engaged me by allowing me to work with Dr. Satcher, putting this presentation together, and then helping to present this information to the students.
This year we are at the centennial of World War I, also known as the Great War. 100 years ago, American Army units engaged in major combat operations in Europe for the first time. And part of those units were African Americans. Over 320,000 African Americans served in World War I, but sometimes they're forgotten, and our purpose here is to remind people of their service. We gave each student was a field kit. The field kit included, first, a list of internet sources where they can find information on African Americans in World War I. We also gave them samples so they knew what they were looking for. This is a picture on the internet of African American soldiers and their white officers. We also included their service record. Every person who served from Florida has a service record on the internet, and it gives details about their service and what unit they were in, and if they went overseas, and other important information.
Well, essentially, as an African American and understanding African American history is often marginalized, I wanted to emphasize their importance to the American story. African Americans have served in various wars throughout American history. So, particularly with World War I wanted to highlight veterans' contribution to the war and to show them the primary sources that allowed them to be engaged with the process. And so, with them having the field kits to be able to look at the sources themselves, it allowed them to be a part of the project and to participate in what I was saying to them.
The goal of the activity was to engage the students and parents in a hands-on activity at the cemetery. So we had them do headstone rubbings in one of the smaller sections of the cemetery. Each of the students and parents, the ones who wanted to do it, sat down in front of the headstones and did a rubbing such as this one.
We engage the students by giving them rubbing wax and letting each of them rub a specific headstone in the cemetery. And this kind of helped the students have a hands-on activity that got them engaged with not only the cemetery, but each individual veteran. And so when they were able to take these home, that kind of gives them an artifact that is a reminder of that experience.
St. Augustine National Cemetery is in a really interesting site. It's at the very southern edge of the historic district in St. Augustine, and it has been an active military site for several centuries. In fact, it is right next to the St. Francis Barracks, which is right now the Florida National Guard site. And the St. Francis Barracks are one of the oldest sites in St. Augustine. The St. Francis Barracks began in the 1700s as a missionary site, hence the St. Francis Barracks, and a cloister for the St. Francis monks who were there, and then eventually, becomes the site of Florida's first militia. Allison Simpson is the historian at the National Guard site in St. Augustine. She is really a terrific partner for us. She has worked at that site for a number of years, and she's been working very hard to uncover not only the history of the St. Francis Barracks and of the National Guard site, but of the St. Augustine National Cemetery that is right next door. And Allison was willing and happy to lead one of the stations, and she introduced the St. Francis Barracks to our students, its architectural importance and its history, and she also introduced our students to the first militia in Florida, which is of course the precursor to the Florida National Guard.
The aim of the performance was to create K through 12 play scripts based upon the collected research by UCF Veterans Legacy Program, as well as creating a video to go along with the play script. And in doing so, creating this journey with undergraduate students and how that looks, how that really the process of putting that together and successfully collaborating to make something that can not only engage K through 12 students, but also their communities.
I've been involved with the monologues really all spring semester, just reading through biographies, finding biographies that, as Holly said, spoke to me, and then creating monologues out of those biographies. So the process of creating the monologue took a few months, and then once you had a nice working monologue, the rehearsal process again took a few weeks, and Holly would come and give me feedback on what I was doing and how it was written and how it would sound, spoken, and how to reach the audience and the students mostly. They were asking questions afterwards to get even more information on the monologues and who these people were.
The aim of our presentation was really to talk about two select servicemen that entered into the World War I from Florida, and to tell their history as well as maybe the experiences that they might have encountered while they were overseas at the front. The overall purpose of our presentation was really to give the community a reason to look back and remember World War I. It is considered the forgotten war for many reasons, just other things have happened, but overall it was really just to give an input and to show everybody what these two individuals would have done within their time of the service.
And we really wanted to draw attention to the fact that May of 2018 would have been the 100-year anniversary of the first time that American soldiers saw combat in World War I.
And we really wanted to touch on the subjects that history is something that you can not only read about, but you can touch, you can see, and you can feel depending on how you look at it. We brought a whole bunch of items along with us to our presentation, dog tags being included, some postcards, as well as one of the patches that was one of the divisions that our servicemen entered into the war from. So mainly it was just giving a sense that these guys actually went through these events. They didn't just read it in a history book. They were actually there when it happened, and these items can kind of give you a sense of what they would have went through.
We also brought several maps with us so that the students could get some context about the areas that we were talking about as we traced the path of the soldiers' journey through France.
Our presentation was kind of unique among the other presentations for the field trip that day, in that Walt and I station was more about the larger role of the veteran, our personal experiences as veterans, and then a question-answer session with the students.
Well, one of the final ways we had the students interact was we had them, if they so choose, to write a thank you card. So they could write whatever they felt like writing to the veterans, and we're going to send those to different veteran groups later. But by doing that, it put a personal spin on it again. And, again, us being veterans, that was a nice touch, I felt. Mm-hmm.
One of the people that made our Day of Learning possible was Lieutenant Colonel Fallon, who leads the National Guard site in St. Augustine. He's a UCF graduate, and not only a graduate of UCF, but he is a history major. We were thrilled that he was happy to work with us, and in addition, of course, to facilitating our whole program and giving us the space that we needed to be able to have some of our Day of Learning at the St. Francis Barracks, he led the lunchtime presentation, which was really a civics lesson in the role that the National Guard plays in Florida today. The Veterans Legacy Program really is still in its infancy. We're in our second year, and I think we're doing amazing work, and I see a bright future for the Veterans Legacy Program. It not only will continue to help UCF students learn about what history is and what historians do, but it's going to help those students understand how to bring these stories of veterans to a public audience, to a K-12 audience, and we'll continue to work with both teachers and K-12 students into the future to continue our Day of Learning and to be able to continue the work that we're doing at both national cemeteries here in the United States and ABM cemeteries abroad.